Hello and welcome to another episode of That Fabric Guy here on YouTube. And today I will be going into how you can set up the start of a metadata driven processing framework for Microsoft Fabric. So let's dive in. All right, so metadata driven processing inside Microsoft Fabric. What is this exactly? So before we go into all the technicalities with the database setup and the data factory and the notebooks, let's first look at what metadata-driven processing actually is. So metadata is data about data. It describes the state of your data, and using metadata, we can describe the state of a data platform, a data warehouse, or a data lake, if you will. Code that is repetitive and that we can use parameters and variables in order to actually run the same code over and over and over again for different entries. That means that we can create a table with basically a list of tables that we want to ingest out of a source database, for example, and then create only one copy activity or only one notebook that is reading data from the source, instead of having to create a copy activity or a notebook per table in our source system. Now, some of the examples of metadata-driven processing, and this goes way beyond just the ingestion automation, but for today, for the purpose of creating a short YouTube video, I will be doing just that. I will be automating and parameterizing the ingestion of tables from a SQL database. And one of the biggest benefits of that is that we can start adding content to our data warehouse without actually writing code. So we have to write the code only once, and then from a data point of view, a configuration data, we can start adding additional configuration that then allows us to create more tables in our data warehouse, for example. So in order to prepare this, I've already created a lakehouse where we will be landing the data, and I've already created a SQL database that I will use as my configuration database for the metadata that we're going to use. And the example for today will be fairly simple, but I'm sure that you can build on top of this principle, right? So what we're going to do is we're going to look at how we can set up a configuration table inside the SQL database, and then we will create a data factory pipeline with a copy activity that is able to read the information from that configuration table in order to copy tables over from a source SQL Server database into our lakehouse on Microsoft Fabric. So let's dive into my laptop and see how that works. So we are looking at my laptop right here, and what I have open on the screen is the SQL database called config. We can see that right here, and I now see that the letters are a bit small, so I will zoom in a little bit in order to actually see what's going on here. What we're looking at here is the config database. As I said, this is a SQL database that is inside Microsoft Fabric. So since a while, we can actually create SQL databases inside Microsoft Fabric, which is basically an Azure SQL database, but inside your Fabric environment, which is perfectly fine. Some of my colleagues don't agree with me. They do other things for metadata and configuration data, but I simply like this SQL database as a store of metadata. So for today, what we're going to do is we're going to create a table called ingest tables, and this table will describe the tables from the source system that we are going to ingest data out of. This table is fairly straightforward. It contains just an ID, which is an identity column. It's automatically incremented. It contains a schema name and the table name, because we need to read from separate schemas in our source database. The source database that we're going to take data out of is the Wide World Importers database that Microsoft created as a demo database for SQL Server, and I'm running that as a Azure SQL database inside my tenant. So that should be enough to create a connection with. So let's start by creating the table. I already put the code in here in order to actually speed up the demo a little bit. And now that the table has been created, we can actually verify that happens. We have an empty table here. We can start inserting data into that table, and that has now happened. So now we have a table that contains 3 records for 3 tables that we want to extract: the cities table, the countries table, and the customers table in the WWI database. Okay, so now we have set up our metadata, and mind you, this is fairly small. I will be, for a proper ingestion framework, I will be adding things like, what columns are we going to ingest? Are we going to ingest all columns, or do we want to exclude a list of columns, or do we want to include a list of columns? I want to know what is the key of this table if I am going to create historical records for this information, for this table. I want to know whether this is a full load or an incremental load table, and if it's an incremental load, what type of incremental load is it? What field can we use in the table? What attribute can we use in order to fetch new records or only change records? So this framework that we're building can be expanded on quite a bit and should be expanded on when we start creating data platforms in production. However, for today, we're going to look at the high-level overview of how we would start to set up a structure like this. So bear with me, this will just be the schema name and the table name for today, but we can expand on this in the future. So we now have our database with the ingestion table descriptions, and from here we will now be able to start to create our the lakehouse is already there. I called it metadata driven. It doesn't really matter what we call it, but the lakehouse where we will be landing our data in is already there. So let's now start creating our pipeline. I call this pipeline ingest. It doesn't really matter what we call it. And here we are in the pipeline. Let's start adding a pipeline activity, and let's start adding the copy data activity in here. We will be needing to create a source. And yes, I know we will not start with just the copy data activity. We need to create a loop and the lookup and then a loop first. But in order to make sure that the proper connections are there and that we have all the information we need, I actually start with just the copy activity right here. We go to the source tab, and there we have to create a connection. Now, looking at my connections here, I see that I've already created my WWI operational database here with Bas as my first name is the user account that I'm going to use here. If you don't have an active connection here, we can start creating a new connection. But for today, this is already there. And this is a Azure SQL database, so I will need to put that in. Now, the loading here failed, and I don't know why. An internal error has occurred. This is something that I'm not sure what's going on. We can say browse all and see what's actually happening here. Maybe we should just go to Azure SQL Database and then start putting our connections in here. So let me go to my other screen, and I will just copy and paste the stuff right here. Wait a second. Here we go. Here's the server name, and then the database is called WWI operational. And then it says there's already a connection there. Let's connect. Invalid credentials. All right, that's odd. I'm logged in as Kimura. It should be all right. From here, we create a new connection with no gateway with my organizational account. And maybe the encrypted connection here was the issue. Let's try and connect here. And that seems to work. Okay, so the configuration of my connection here was not all right. So now we've set up the source connection in here, and we can now start configuring how we want to query the database in order to copy data over to our target, to our lakehouse in this case. So by default, the table has been selected, but we can also say query or stored procedure. And this allows us to start create a metadata driven ingestion framework. We can do so in a couple of ways. I'm going to show you right now how that would look like. From here, for example, we can look at warehouse.callers, which is just a small table in the warehouse, or sorry, in the database where we have a few callers, Azure being the first one, of course. As you can imagine, putting in a table here and then copying this activity and then putting another table is very tedious and very hard to actually maintain and upgrade. So let's not do that. So what we can do here is we can click outside of the cell and start putting in parameters. And the parameter can be, for example, the schema name, and it can be the table name. That's that. We have those two, and now in our copy data activity, what we can do here is we can say I want to enter manually my schema name and table name, and then instead of saying warehouse and colors here, I want to add dynamic content, and I want to add the schema name parameter, and I want to add the table name parameter. Right there, and now because this background here is green, or if you're working in Azure in Azure Data Factory, the background will be blue. We know that this is a parameterized input cell. We could have done the same with the query by building up a SQL query there to extract data, and that's something I would do if I was, for example, loading data incrementally, filtering on a timestamp or a row version column. For right now, for this purpose, just putting in the table name and schema name will be enough. All right, so now we've created this parameterized ingestion. Now we need to put our data into a destination. So let's create a new connection. The connection is not here, so we will create browse all, connection to Lakehouse. No, not new Lakehouse, sorry. Here in OneLake catalog, we should find something. The UI there was a bit broken. So let's click here on Metadata Driven, and we should be fine. We're going to put data into our root folder, and then we're going to put data into a manual table name here. And now, because I've created a schema enabled lakehouse, we can actually put a schema name in here. I will not put the schema name from the source in here. I will put the schema name bronze in here, because this will be the bronze layer of my lakehouse medallion architecture in the future. So I will call this one bronze, and then the table name, I will create a dynamic content. And now you could say, okay, we put in the table name. However, this might be a bit dangerous, because here in the table name, because the source is selected by schema name and table name, the table name doesn't have to be unique. So we're going to actually put in both the table name and the schema name. And we can do so by looking for a function called concat, which will concatenate two strings together. And we can do so by putting in schema name, and then we put the string together using an underscore. And then we put in the table name in here. And now we've created a dynamic value that puts schema name underscore table name as the target table name in our lakehouse. All right. So that's that. Let's see how this works. So if I now have to run this in here, I have to save it and then run first. It will now ask me for input information, and still this is not very automated, but that will come in a minute. From here we had this colors set up, warehouse and colors. So we can now test and validate whether this is actually working. This should be fairly simple because it's only a very small data set. So let's find out here in output whether this is actually running. It is not at the moment, but we need to have a little bit of patience. All right, so now the pipeline is run. So we can go into our lakehouse here, and we can actually verify that this has worked by refreshing our tables and finding out whether this actually has done something. Refresh. There we go. I was refreshing the wrong schema, so that makes sense. Actually, there's nothing in DBO, but there should be something in bronze, and actually there is something in bronze. And what is there in bronze? It is called warehouse colors, and then of course here we can get the table preview, and here we are. Here are the colors that we have actually loaded into the lakehouse. So this now works. It works brilliantly well. So let's see how we can actually make this a bit more metadata driven. Let's go back to the ingest pipeline. We have the copy data activity here, and this is parameterized. So we can put in any parameters here in the pipeline, and then we can have that working. Let's go back up and start adding another pipeline. And we call this pipeline Orchestrate. Orchestrate. And in Orchestrate, we're going to add a pipeline activity that is called a lookup. And we will be looking up against our configuration database. So lookup ingest tables. I like to give names to objects. That's always good. And let's see. We pick our config database here. And in this case, we can hard code it to the table that we've created. It will take a while. I don't know. It's quite slow. If it doesn't work, I can enter it manually, but I think it's there now. Okay, so now here we have the ingest tables, and we have to deselect first row only, because otherwise we just get one row and we want all of the rows in this table, right? Under advanced, there's nothing that we need to do here. So now basically this will return a value, and let's run this pipeline so that we can actually see what the output of this activity will be. Okay, the pipeline is run, and when we go here to output, we can actually find out what the output is. So let's click here on output, and here we will find the actual output on our screen. Let's zoom in a little bit, where we see that we get an array of values, an array of rows basically, with all the 3 rows in our table. So we're going to iterate over the values of our value array here. Now, when we do so, we get the following thing. We now need a for each loop. So where is that again? Activities here, for each loop, is that here? No, it's not. Okay, then we need to search for it. For each, there we go. We need to connect, of course. And then before we can start adding activities, we have to click this for each loop. For each ingest table, we need to do something. We need to go over the activity output of our lookup ingest tables. And then we go over the value array. So this is actually the object that we need to iterate over. We say, okay, that's all right. Then we go here and we start adding an activity. And this activity will be to invoke a pipeline. And we are going to invoke our ingest pipeline. We can click on that. We can either double click here and get the for each workflow here, but because we only have one object that we're going to start, it's fine just to click it. Here we can see that we are in this invoke pipeline, and we say invoke pipeline ingest. Again, to have something named properly. Under settings, we are going to tell the system where this pipeline is that we're going to invoke. It's a Fabric pipeline, so that's all right. We can browse and we can find actually the Fabric pipeline that we have to create. Maybe we have to create a new connection. Let's try that. Going to the workspace, settings, connections and gateways. Create a new connection. To Fabric Data Pipelines. That Fabric Guy Pipelines. Authentication method will be OAuth. There we are. Now we've created this connection. This was apparently something I forgot how to do. I don't know. Good morning, boss. So we refresh this, and there we have our That Fabric Guy Pipelines connection to That Fabric Guy, and we should be able to then refresh and start to find our pipeline. And here we have two parameters that we need to put in. One is called schema name. One is called table name. And both of them are strings. And they both have a value. And this value is something I will inject from our iterator, item.schema name. Because the column in our result set is called schema name. And here, item.table name. Like so. There we are. Wait for completion, yes. And now, when we save this, there's a request validation error. So the UI here is broken a little bit. I don't know why, but apparently this now should be able to work. There we go. And now we should be able to run this orchestrate pipeline. And that will then call 3 instances in this case, because we have 3 records in our metadata driven configuration set. So this will trigger 3 instances of the ingest pipeline. And now we have coded only once, and we can execute 3 times or many times. And here we see that 3 invoke pipelines are being executed. And now we can see that the pipeline has run successfully 3 times. And going to the lakehouse, we will find that we have 3 new tables, 4 in total, so that's that. So today we have learned how we can approach a very lightweight metadata-driven approach to ingesting data out of databases into Microsoft Fabric. We've done so through a configuration data set in the SQL Database in Fabric, and then a pipeline to ingest data into the lakehouse. So if you like this video, do not forget to give me a thumbs up on this video. Do me a favor, please, and subscribe, because I spend a lot of time creating these videos for you. They are free, but they are not free of charge. And the charge that I'm charging you, or the thing that I'm charging you, is a subscription to my channel. So please do so, and I'll see you next week.